women who organize events related to UX, UI, and everything about design. And any newcomers here? Anybody who's not been here before? Woo, super nice. Whoa. Welcome here to the community. All right. A bit about us. We are a global organization, so we aren't the only ladies at UX. We have them in London, in the US, everywhere, more than 50 cities. Amsterdam, we have more than 2,600 members in our community, so we're really happy to have you all on board. We are welcoming an inclusive community, so no discrimination between gender, age, nothing. Everybody can come to an event, everybody can talk. But of course, we promote female talent. We encourage women to come and speak up, to give them a shot at talking in a more public way. And also, we again are inclusive to all, so anyone who's interested in the ladies at UX and the events are welcome to join. Code of conduct. So we have a code of conduct, so if anybody feels like something's not right or they think that we can do something better, please come to us. Can I have hands up of all the organizers so you know who to contact? Yeah? There, perfect. Also, a warm welcome. I mean, we're welcomed by a factory. Where's Sander?
Yes.
Thanks for hosting us again. As usual, it's been amazing. And you can take the floor.
You're welcome. Thank you. Yeah, so usually I would tell you something about a factory, but I'm not going to do that today. But you can look at our website and figure out what we do yourself. No, today I have a few minutes of your time, and I want to take that time to thank somebody who's been organizing a lot of the behind-the-scenes stuff. So Eric is hiding right there. But just like simple things, for today we had to do 100 name tags. We had to put up all these chairs, we had to put them back. And Eric does this about 3 times every month for different meetups. He buys his own equipment. He sets this up, he does a live stream to make sure the food is ready, and he never asks for anything in return. Wow. So, if we can give him something in return.
One more thing. And one more thing. We have a sponsor of the year award, and this award goes to Eric.
The same thing is on the cup. Thanks,
Oh,
Eric.
thank you very much. Wonderful.
Literally, we've been organizing events for over 3 years right now, and I can definitely say that none other company meets us the same way and treats us the same way. So thanks, eFactory. You guys are awesome. Thank you.
Well, thank you.
And without further ado, let's start. Let's get Marigo. Where is she? Okay.
Okay, I need to
Before we
switch
start,
that.
one practical thing. I think we're also live streaming tonight, we're at least videotaping. That means that if you have a question, you can ask it. I will throw you this cube. It's not hard, don't worry. And you can talk into the microphone.
Okay, well, welcome everybody. I am Marigo, and I work as a UX designer at Clever Franke. And in a nutshell, what we do at Clever Franke is we take the essence from data and we tell a story to a user that highlights the most important things from the data and that guides the user through the story. And this is what I really love to do. I really love to help users make sense of things. And it's also why I came to the topic of calm UX. Because at a lot of companies that I've worked before as a UXer, a lot of the design and marketing was aimed at screaming at users and sending them a lot of things in order for the companies to seem like experts. But I feel like we should do it in a different way. So today I want to take you through my experience with calm UX, and I have some practical guidelines for us as designers that we can already start with UX, calm UX. So let's start with a short history lesson. Actually, back in 2003, the BlackBerry is the one that invented the notifications that we know today. And they actually did this with the best intentions. They wanted people to spend less time on their phones. Because back then, actually, you didn't get any notification if you had a new email, so you needed to actively go into your phone, open your email app, and see that there was no new email, so you did it all for nothing. So they thought if we give them a notification, that they would not have to go into their phones when it is not needed. You're already laughing. Well, yeah, that didn't really work out the way we planned it, because as we all know today, notifications are being used by companies to send information and to really scream at us. And with all of the notifications that we get, there's really no way of filtering out anymore what we need to look at and what the important things are. So really, it is a way now for us to spend more time on our phones. And to show you how big of an impact it is in people's lives, some statistics have actually shown that people use their smartphone about 110 times a day, and spend over 4 hours a day on smartphone interactions. And most of it is used in different apps on your smartphone, but also browsing and stuff. And also an interesting statistic is that 1 in 5 people have used their smartphone doing sex, according to this research. Don't know what for, but. So really this sums up into, like, we live in a world where all of technology is really screaming at us, and it's always trying to get our attention and drawing our attention from the physical world into the digital world. And it's not just notifications, really, it's all of technology around us. It's all aimed at getting as much of our attention as it can. And if we don't do something now, it might only get worse, because with the coming age of technology and all sorts of augmented reality, virtual reality, we might be looking at a world where there's no escape from the screams of technology anymore, and it might look like this. Now this is even more interesting or important, really, if you understand how our brains work. Because basically, our brains have a limited amount of mental resources that they can use. And every task that we do requires a certain amount of these mental resources. Now, physical tasks, or tasks in the physical world, they're very automated. We have evolved to be very good at them, and they require very little of our attention. So basically, if we drink a cup of coffee, we can also at the same time read a book, because we're just combining all these tasks. But tasks in the digital world are still very new in a way to our existence as human beings. So they take up a lot of our attention. And that means it's hard to combine tasks, but also that if there are a lot of tasks that we need to do, it really overwhelms our brains and takes up all of our mental resources. That's why if you are interrupted for a Facebook notification, for example, it takes you about 24 minutes to get back to your original task. This is specifically the case when your task was very high demanding attentionally. And this is because of 2 reasons. The first one is, like I said, it takes your brain a lot of time to focus on a high attentional task. Switching between those things costs a lot of time. But there's also the thing that when you go into your phone and you look at this notification that you got, there's also a lot of other notifications. And you start looking at an important work email, but end up maybe looking at the Twitter feed of your friend's cat. So you really end up in this bottomless vortex of stuff. Now, as I was researching this, I found that there was actually 2 sides to this problem. The first one is really the way that information is being presented to us. It's really presented in a way that draws all of our attention, asks for our full attention, and it also does its best to keep our attention. For example, your endless scrolling in your Facebook or Twitter feed, it's meant to keep your attention as long as possible. The other side to the story is that interacting with tools, as I mentioned, it takes a lot of our mental resources because the tasks are not automated yet. We have to learn them, and although over the years we as designers have tried to make them as simple as possible, it's still not the same as physical things that we do while we're doing other things. But during this talk, I really want to focus on the first part, so that's why I want to tell you this. So let's take a step back and see, how did we get here? Why did this happen? Basically, one of the big big things around this is that business models are actually designed to make money from our attention. So a lot of big companies use very outdated KPIs, if you ask me, that are like, for example, time spent on page, time spent in my app. Which means that the more time that you spend in Facebook, the more money Facebook makes. And that's why they keep actively working on drawing your attention in, and they want you to drop everything to focus on their app or their product. Now, I'm not a businesswoman, so I don't want to go into this too much, but it's a very important thing, I think, to understand why the world is this way right now. And the way that they do this is they use a lot of our innate cognitive biases against us. Because over the years, we've evolved into using a lot of biases, escapes, to keep alive, basically. For example, we react very easily to sudden noises and movements in the environment. Because back when we were still like a caveman, that could have meant that there was a predator in the bushes. And reacting quickly to that might be the difference between being eaten or staying alive another day. So I think all of us designers also know about these things, and we try to use them for good. But the way that companies use them is also to steal away our attention and to make us do things that we might not want to do. One easy example of that is the way that we all know notifications to be. They're like big red bubbles that pop up suddenly, often with a lot of noise or buzzing and a lot of movement. And like I said, that's what we easily react to. And the other side to that is that they also use red bright colors, which is another example of something that we've evolved to react to, because basically that could mean the difference between ripe food or poisonous food. So it is no surprise that a screen like this, for me at least, it makes me feel very anxious, and I feel like I need to do something now. And now there's a simple trick, actually, and then like this, it already looks a lot better, right? And that's something that a guy called Tristan Harris is actually advocating. And he calls himself an advocate of time well spent, and he wants to make it known to the world that companies are doing these tricks, pulling these tricks on us. And he also has a lot of things that you can, settings on your phone that you can change that will help undo these tricks. One example of that is turning your screen to black and white. While I think this is very commendable already, I think that as designers, we can do better. This is just a band-aid to a problem, but we should really address the underlying problem. So what if we start looking at the way that information is presented in a different way? What if we can use shapes, colors, movement, anything that will help people see information from the corner of their eye at a glance and help them understand what they need to do? So basically, how can we as designers redesign the way that technology speaks to us so that it is more respectful of our time and our needs, and that we can design for a better digital world? Now that is where Calm UX comes in, and that's what I want to talk to you a little bit about. I was trained as a product designer, and back in the days, I was already very interested in a topic called calm technology. And this was actually coined by a guy called Mark Weiser in the 1990s already. And he said at that point, I feel that technology should be everywhere, it should be omnipresent, but it should stay in the background as long as we don't need it. And it should only be in the foreground of our attention, in the center of our attention, when we need it to be. And this is actually how most of the physical objects around us are, in a way, because this glass of water is always there, and I'm aware of it, but it doesn't come into my center of attention unless I want it to. So physical objects are very passive in that way. But now that we live in this world where there's so many digital objects around us, we also find that they're very active and they're always asking for our attention. So really the conversation is turning around from us starting a conversation to the object starting a conversation. Now, Amber Case is one of my personal heroes because she has been already advocating the calm technology and making it important again. And she wrote a book about this as well. In this book, she is telling about the guidelines that she thinks we can use in design to make technology calm. Examples of this are we should make technology that requires the least amount of our attention as possible, and that should create a sense of calmness in people, really. So what I wanted to do is see how can I apply these guidelines to my daily work as a UXer. So how can we use these principles in the digital world, and how can we easily start with applying this already at this point. So I came up with 3 of my own guidelines that I think we as designers can already start applying in every project without even having to go into the change business models, that we can really just start creating that common world. So the first one is design for relevancy. And what I mean with that is humans are not users in a way. We all know they don't sit behind their laptops totally focused on our design all the time. They have a lot of things to do. They might be on the move. They might be watching their child, for example. So we want to help them understand the data and present just enough information for them that is necessary to work with at the right time, at the right place. So that means that we as designers, it becomes even more important for us to know the data that we're working with, to be able to highlight the specific stories behind the data, highlight the data that's relevant for the user, and really design a data system instead of static pages that show all the data. Now, as I said, that's something that Kleef Franke also does a lot, so this is an example of my own work. Because at Kleef Franke, we have to make sense of huge piles of data all the time. And what we do is we take out the highlights for our clients to help them understand this data set. And this is an example of a client that observes natural forests and creates alerts when they see some deforestation taking place. So they started off sending this long list of alerts. This is not even the full list, it was way longer. And told their clients, well, here's all the data that we have, just go investigate yourself. So they came to us because they found that we need a better way to represent this. And what we did with this is we really dived into the minds of their users to see what is actually important and why is it important to you. And we ended up creating a design system. This is a snippet of that, where we really show the most important notification about deforestation at this time that they find important to act on, and we allow them to act on it easily. So instead of creating one page with alerts, we really created a system that they can navigate through the way that they want to, highlighting the important things. One other very simple example is also understanding what your user needs at this moment in time while he's doing something. So for example, if you're on your bike cycling to this meetup, you don't need to know everything, all the navigational points along your way. You don't need to know where you're going. You just need to know at the next intersection, I need to go right, and after that point, I'll get a new notification. This is a very easy way of highlighting what's important. The second guideline is design for ease of mind. So like I mentioned, we have only a limited amount of mental resources, and we should keep it in mind when we're designing as well, that we should design calm interactions that require less of our mental capacity, and instead of designing against that, design for it, so that we don't need to put all of our attention towards something that's not relevant. So basically what that comes down to is that not everything needs to scream. We can think about using nudges and contextual cues that help people decide on what to focus on more easily, so that we help them guide their attention towards the things that require their attention at this moment, and not to the things that don't matter. So an example of that is we could look into using non-textual cues, because text is very high demanding intentionally. It takes you a lot of time to go through everything. But by using simple things like colors and shapes and movement of shapes, we can already create an image that from the corner of your eye tells you whether or not you should focus on it. So if this image is completely moving and shaking, then that might give me an indication that something's going on and I need to get out of this noisy area. But other than that, I'm just aware of the fact that everything is okay. One other example is looking at context. So not everything needs to be on a digital screen, of course. We can also look into how we can use the context of people to convey information. And when we do this, the message that we're portraying doesn't need to be that long or complicated, because the message is linked to a contextual cue that already tells you what's happening. So in this example, this shows a pill cap, where every time you need to take your pill, this thing lights up. So if you see it light up, you know immediately what to do because you need to take your pill. And this also helps you feel at ease because you know that technology is there for you when you need it to be, and it helps you to take the actions that you need to take. And the last one is design for humans. This might sound very logical, but I've noticed throughout the years that we, as designers and as the companies I work at, we use a lot of business jargon, a very technical explanation for things that people might have learned throughout the years, but they're not really human. So really, if you're designing, we should think about using very understandable language and familiar human-to-human interaction patterns that help people to take the right action, to understand what they need to do next. One example of that is also like tapping somebody on the back instead of screaming in his face, like asking for permission to talk to somebody. Now, an example of a project I did once is we looked at how banking in the Netherlands can be more innovative. And one of the things that I found in working for some banks is that we all use the term transferring overboeken, so transferring money. But this is actually a very technical term that we have just learned to use because it means transferring money from one technical entity to another technical entity that we don't see. So for me as a person, that doesn't really exist, because what I want to do is I want to give you money or I want to pay you back for something. So we thought, what if you just use these types of terminology in design? So say, instead of transferring money, give money or get money or ask for money, things like that, that already make it a lot more human-like and less business-like. Another example of this is when you use the physical world to interact with your phone, for example. Because our phones are also physical devices that we can use in different ways than just tapping on an app screen. So what if you think about how people interact with each other in the physical world? Before that was sticky. We used to, if you sit on a table, you drank some beers together, people would throw money on the center of the table and then went home and the bill was paid. So what if you use the same type of interaction pattern, putting your phone in the center of the table, and that will trigger a reaction for you to be able to pay for your beers or your coffee or whatever that you're drinking, instead of having to go in an app and doing something that is not very human-like. Bringing it all together, I want to show you a little example that I made to show how, with some easy tweaks, you can already make something a lot more calm. Because when I was researching for this presentation, one of my colleagues mentioned to me that in the NS app, you can actually input your trajectory, and then it gives you a notification if your train is not running. So I thought that's really nice, because then I'll have more time. I don't need to wait at the train station for nothing. But what actually happened is my trains run every 10 minutes. And I just ended up getting a notification of NS every 10 minutes. And it buzzed my phone, it made a lot of noise, and it was a message like this that said, alert, 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 and I just got totally crazy and turned it off again. But I thought that's really a bad thing, because the principle behind it really ties into what I think a calm world should be. So I thought, how can we redesign these things so that it actually helps me be calm? So a very easy example, I just took their notification and I tweaked it a little bit so that it actually becomes a more clearer message, and it actually highlights what I need to know. I don't really need to know why my train is not running. All I need to know is your train is not running for the next couple of hours. Stay where you are. And if you present that with a simple visual cue, like for example a train that's red, it already tells me at the glance of an eye, hey, there's something wrong with my train, I should really look into this. Also, another example is if you talk like a human and you just say, if anything changes, we'll let you know, that really makes me feel at ease and helps me understand what you're talking about. Now, of course, like I said, we should also be designing a design system instead of separate pages. So there might be some more information that we're hiding now because it's not relevant at this moment. But if people want to go there, they can. And then we can tell them why the trains are not running. But we can also take away some more of their worries. So we can tell them a little bit about, hey, you can check yourself here when your train is running. Don't worry, you'll make your appointment to whatever you're going to. But also what I want to highlight is that I feel that businesses might be afraid that doing things like this will actually cost them money because they won't get time spent in their app anymore. But I feel like there's also a lot of business opportunities, like in this case, adding some coupons for people to spend their time at a restaurant instead of at work, for example. So it's a very easy example, but I think it highlights a little bit how to tweak things easily. So in a nutshell, to me, a calmer world is a world where we are in charge of our attention and we get to decide where to put our attention towards and how to use our time. And I think that also means that as designers, we need to think about not only when people use our product, but also when they're not using our products. Because we live in a world where everything is screaming at us, like I said, and we really want to design for a sense of calmness and peace of mind that makes all of us feel more calm and alive. So as designers, I feel that it is our job to fire up this discussion about ethics, business objectives. Even if we're not the ones deciding on business models, I think we can help decide on more updated KPIs. So maybe instead of thinking about time on page, let's think about how fast can a user get back to his own life once he has closed our app again. So I really think we should advocate for calmness and let go of engagement because that's very outdated and we cannot keep going with like this anymore. So as a takeaway, I would like you to consider the next time that you're designing, think about these things. So ask yourself, can I leave out something more? Is this helping somebody, or is there a better highlight to present to them? Are there more relevant data snippets? Can I make it even smaller? Also think about, what if I get this message 100 times a day? Because you're probably not the only company sending out these messages. So does it actually get through all of the amount of notification that we're getting? And also, is this what I want my user's life to be like? And the last thing is this how I would talk to my mother? Is this how you would explain somebody, a person in natural terms, something? Or is it more like you would talk with your colleague that already knows the business, for example? So really allow people to be people. So now I would like to challenge you. I would like to ask you, how are you going to create a calmer world? That's it. That's it.
I guess you made everybody think that.
Yeah.
Do you want to ask questions?
Yeah.
Anybody questions?
You ready?
Okay, I got it. Is DNS going to implement your redesign?
I hope so, but
Are you talking to them about it? They should, though. Send them a message or something.
Yeah.
Tweet.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Thanks.
Questions? I'm terrible at throwing, but it's not that bad.
So, like I missed a little bit. So interrupt me if I saying something stupid. But how do you recommend to deal with the kind of tension between business objectives and calmness? If you how you say that? Or is this the whole part that I missed?
No.
Okay,
That's,
right.
I didn't focus on it that much, but I think as a UX designer, I've often been on the table with a lot of stakeholders and people that are involved with all of the marketing stuff. And I think the most important thing for us as designers is to really be the advocates of this calmness and to be the ones that say, should we look at this in a different way? Is this really what we want to achieve do we want to get people to spend more time on our websites, or do we want to help them with their lives? So it's more a sense of taking the role of the advocate of the columnist, I would say.
I have a question. Hi. How can we partner up, for example, with copywriters or with technical writers in our companies to provide more calmness in the products? Or from your experience, how is this collaboration with designers and other specialists?
Yeah, well, I think it should be a collaboration of everybody indeed. And that's why I think it should be something that we all feel in a way, that's a common goal for all of the people involved in any of the design aspects of a website or a product or what have you. I think the best way to do that is to have all your colleagues get them also excited about this topic and help them understand why it's so important for people to not have to read this long text, but to really be easily enticed to start doing something. And one of the things I also did at a company I worked at is that they were very common to writing long introduction text to just almost a login screen or something like that. They had a very long text. It was just the way that they used to work. It was not, they didn't really think about it. So I just went through it with them and I showed them, is this how you want your users to get to know you? Is this what you want them to do before they get to understand your product? And I made them see, hey, this takes people 20 minutes to go through. Is this what you want? Just highlight the things that make it better to really put your attention towards this.
Yeah, I think it's also nice to have personas so you know who you're talking to, for example.
Yeah.
So you can relate to these people,
yeah,
to your users. Yeah, awesome. Thank you. Yeah? Okay. Be careful.
Okay, got it. Thanks. All right, a bit of an assumption, but I feel like with being able to design calmer technology, we might need technology to be smarter in a way, because it should know what we want without it kind of telling us, which means in a way we have to give more access to apps and other things on our phones to know when we sleep, when we eat, when we do different things, so that it's aware of how to be calm for us. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, yeah, I think that would help, but I think it's also a matter of already understanding simple context. Of course, the more that you know about people, the more that you can really help them in their daily lives. But there's also a privacy issue, and that's a whole different conversation. But it's even simple things. I remember when I got when I installed Dropbox and I got my first Dropbox notification, it happened on all the devices that I was working at. So even just knowing, it's easy to know on what device I'm working at currently, what I'm interacting with, only send notification on that device. So there's a lot of steps to take in between, I think, before we go to that
level.
Knowing what you eat and when you go to sleep type of thing. Yeah.
Okay, cool, thanks. Oh, lots more questions. Okay, let's take the last 3 questions.
I was just curious about the example you gave of the watch with the squiggly lines. I didn't quite understand what that product was, and I was hoping you could explain a bit more.
It's actually a concept product from Kleef Franke, where we measure the environmental things, so noise, temperature, air movement, I think, and we present that in a more visual way. So instead of saying the noise is too loud for your ears, we have this visualization that starts moving or that changes color depending on what's happening in the room around you. So it gives you a little bit more information than you can normally see.
So is it about health, or is it oh, I'm curious about my surrounding?
It's both, but I think it started off as making sure that people know that they're in a healthy environment, especially air-wise, because noise is something that you can already, of course, hear a little bit, but air pollution or air, the quality of the air is something that we really highlighted here as well.
Mm-hmm. Okay, interesting.
There's another question. And there was one also. Just throw it over here. Raise your hand.
Who is it? You? Okay.
Thank you. That was strong. I have a question, because you said that the key performance indicators time spent or I don't know, everything is engagement is outdated. So how do you are gonna replace it? How do you have alternative? Of course, depends of the product what you are developing or designing, but still these two is still using right now in every company. So do you have an alternative to these key performance indicators that maybe we are not paying attention, but are also important?
Yeah, I don't have an exact alternative, but I do feel that KPIs do need to change in the way that we think about how to enrich our users' lives. So that's not just having them spend more time on our page, but that's also how quick can they go back to their daily life. So how fast can they do our interaction? How fast can they leave, really? Or maybe like things, people should not spend X amount of time on our devices, because that's not really what we wanted to achieve. We just wanted to be a portal for messaging with communication, but not for dragging people in. So I think it's also a different way of looking at how you want to approach your users in a way, and form KPIs around that. Don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, because always in marketing you need this for showing your progress.
Yeah.
And maybe are not the best, but combine it with another ones or new ones, you can show what is your progress.
Yeah.
So it's not that you can skip them.
Yeah, and the difficult thing is also that calmness is a bit more difficult to measure in a way, because it's really, if everything is okay, then people will use your product less, maybe even. So I understand that that's still a thing to consider. Yeah.
But maybe loyalty increases, and that's more important.
Yeah.
Than engagement ever.
One more question, and I think it goes to the direction. Yeah, that's
You? Yeah. Okay. Oh. The nicest way.
Yesterday I read an article on Nielsen Norman Group about the vortex effect, and it was funny because now with your speaker I can see everything. But on their article they talk about all the notifications and everything, how the people feel trapped and with the cell phone, and how they spend like 4 hours on the phone. But we, as design, you have to do something to attract users for our product. But we have to measure how for the users not to feel trapped, you know?
Yeah.
So it's, what's the way? I know you bring, but it's a long way there to see. I know you show the way of the NES. You can try to do that, but it's. I think you have a long way until we can find the right balance. Because today the users really feel trapped on the cell phone with lots of apps and everything.
Yeah, so that's actually interesting, because one of the things that I found researching this is that at one point my Instagram showed a message that says, "You're all caught up" or something. You've seen all the new things. Don't scroll any further. But they also deleted it right away. It was like it was there for one day and then it was not. But I felt that that's actually an interesting thing, because even like I'm scrolling Instagram and I'm seeing all things. It's taking away time that I have already spent also. So maybe these types of paradigms are also the first step to take. And Facebook talking about how many hours have you spent on Facebook, to make people aware of this fact, instead of tricking them, really, because that's what's happening now.
Yeah, for sure.
Cool. Anyone with more questions can ask her after the session. Thank you.
models and KPIs, and how do we actually sort of shift the systems around it rather than just the interfaces themselves. So before I'll talk about that, who the hell is this girl in front of you? So my name is Nadia Pete. I mostly work as a freelancer, sort of between business and design. So it's this thing that recently they started calling service or strategic design, but yeah, titles. But I suppose that's the closest thing to what I do. I work a lot with Decoded, which is a technology education company. We basically help big companies sort of, get back in touch with everything that's happening in the digital world. Then I'm still studying, so I'm doing business innovation, currently doing my graduation project with MobGen, which is part of Accenture Interactive. Shout outs to my colleagues over there. Thanks for the support. And yeah, then I'm a bit of a tech nerd in disguise between all the, beneath all the business and design stuff. I'm a bit of a huge nerd, actually. So this is me at like age 10, and this is me at age 20. And yeah, it's just kind of always me behind the computer. Because I just love hacking shit and browsing the infinite source that is the internet. And yeah, I'm just very fascinated with, I also did a bit of coding, started that when I was like 8, because that's kind of the only way you can do stuff on the internet at that time is to actually code it yourself. Never had the ambition to be a developer, but now that I'm a bit older again, I'm like, oh, I really like this techie stuff. And yeah, I kind of miss it. And so that's me, and in general, I'm just kind of fascinated by how we shape technology and technology shapes us. That's a very broad statement, but I suppose you all share that passion, otherwise you probably wouldn't be here today. So it's clear that technology has a big impact on us. The research on this is practically impossible because we can't find a control group. So think about this, you're a researcher, you have to prove something in a scientific matter. You have to find a group that has a similar living environment as all of us, but then without the smartphone, right? To really measure an impact. It's not gonna happen. You're not really gonna be able to find that. And so there's very little hard data on like the correlation or causation between digital technology and well-being. But I guess we don't always need the hard scientific stuff. We can just look around, and empirical evidence is kind of enough to see that technology is shape-shifting the world in very good ways and not so desirable ways as well. This is a random photo series I really like by a guy called Eric Vickersgill, where he took pictures of people and then removed the devices from the images, and it just strikes me as absurd. And yeah, it's very fun. So yeah, also like Mariko already mentioned, we've all sort of started to take individual responsibility for this. We're like, my device is kind of taking over my life. Oh, what should I do? So we turn off notifications, we go grayscale. Some of us have recently shifted a lot to the voice notes, and of course all this stuff is really good, and I've been trying it, and it does give you a different relationship with your device and sort of how it's helping you rather than distracting you. So that's a good place to start. Some people have even shifted to more radical alternatives like the light phone. I don't know if anybody's seen this. It's sort of like a reimagined phone, and it's kind of back to like the Nokia 3310, but then it looks more visually appealing. And some of us have gone as far as to go like on digital detox retreats. Whatever you got to do to disconnect, it's fine. That's cool. No judgment. What I'm just wondering is like how realistic is this? Like our willpower only goes that far. And on the other side of the screen of you trying to have like a healthy relationship with your device is a team of attention engineers. That's actually a job title now. It's kind of messed up. But people with like really good bodies of knowledge about the human brain and just behavioral science, neuroscience. We're only learning more about that stuff, and all of them are kind of conspiring there to figure out how to keep you glued to your screen, not because they're evil people. We'll get to that later. It's not necessarily their fault. But it is like that, right? It's kind of you versus like all these smart-ass people that are figuring out how to keep you there. So is it realistic of us to, put all this responsibility on ourselves? Not sure. I think no, but I'll let you judge that yourself. What is this? That's the sudden movements thing, right? And it throws you off. Yeah, so machine learning and AI will only amplify this, and I'm learning a lot about this recently, really fascinated by it. And obviously this will kind of, this team that is now maybe 10 people figuring out those tricks, it's now going to be, you know, a supercomputer figuring out those tricks for you individually as a person based on your exact, you know, psyche and demographic and everything. So that makes the fight, I think, even more imbalanced. One example of this, going a little bit of sidetrack here, but I think it's really interesting to think about this, is, so this one, it's called psychographic persona. It's like this ability that they're using, applying AI in marketing, basically. And it can kind of analyze your personality or, you know, your character based on, for example, your Twitter data. So this one is actually my data. So if you see anything weird, don't judge me for it. But yeah, so it kind of pulls in your Twitter data, right? This is public. Anybody can pull this in. And it makes these assumptions about your personality. And the catch of this is that once they know these very subtle, you know, workings of your mind, they can kind of target that. So say, okay, I am a very curious person, right? And I don't really care too much about tradition. Like, besides now deciding that they can target me with this ad, they could also do much more intricate things like showing me a slightly different text or showing me a picture of people hugging instead of a person on a mountaintop, or they can really, you know, target things exactly to your persona. And that's what happened with the whole Cambridge Analytica thing, to whoever is aware of that. So now, you know, insights like this even skew like elections and just historical events, not just which ad you're going to see. So it's from very small to very big sort of implications. That much about AI. I could rave about it, but it's not really what this talk's about. So yeah, mostly last year, actually 2018, 2017 already a little bit. There was this, basically a lot of people started turning against like the big tech, like Google, Amazon, Facebook. So you already mentioned Tristan Harris. So that's a guy, he used to work for Google, and you know, he grew increasingly sort of, yeah, uncomfortable with his position there and what they were actually doing. And so he quit and started the Center for Humane Tech, where he's kind of spearheading this movement of, you know, making ethical, responsible, helpful technology rather than persuasive ones. Then the Cambridge Analytica thing, then a lot of employees like quit with Google and Facebook and Microsoft, and all the companies started going crazy, girl, the talent is leaving. Yeah, there was a lot of stuff happening last year, and I think that's kind of why maybe this is even a meetup, because now a lot of people are sort of waking up to this reality and realizing that the fact we interact with this like this with technology is not just because, you know, we are whatever, like we are poor at, you know, self-control, but these people are actually working quite hard to keep us there. So yeah, these companies have sort of admitted, like, okay, you know, maybe this is not the nicest thing we're doing. Integrated small things. So if you own an iPhone, you've probably seen the screen time app pop up like sometime fall last year. Seems like a small intervention, but when you really think about it, it's already a huge thing, right? Apple can do this because Apple's business model doesn't actually rely on you to spend time on your phone. You already bought the phone, right? It creates the hardware and the OS. And that's why Apple, as a company, is actually able to do that. But say Facebook is not, because their income does rely on the amount of time you spend on the app, right? So Apple did that. Instagram did this one, which you're right, they did remove again. So they created this sort of stop moment. So there's this whole idea around when you're reading a book, or, you know, when you're interacting with sort of physical media, there's like a stop moment where you're like, oh, do I want to continue to the next chapter? Do I want to see another movie? Do I want to? And digital doesn't have that. It's just like an infinite rabbit hole, right? An infinite scroll, infinite everything. So they introduced that. So they are sort of waking up to, you know, users being discontented and wanting better technology. So that's good that we're at least making enough noise, you know, for them to do something. So yeah, I think we need to admit two things before moving on. One is that we are hackable. So we like to think ourselves as like conscious agents and smart people that make well-considered choices all the time, but in reality, that's just not really the case. And we kind of have to get off our high horse and realize that we are very, persuadable and very malleable, not because we're stupid, but because we've all evolved in the same way, right? Otherwise, you wouldn't be here. You would be long dead, and your ancestors would be long dead. The only reason you're here is because your brain works in a certain way, right? And as we're learning more and more about what exactly that way is, it's easier to target that. So yeah, we are very hackable and persuadable. And then tech is not neutral. So we like to think of tech as neutral, and I've heard people say this a lot of like, oh yeah, it's like a knife, you can like cut an apple or stab a person, or it's like fire, you can build a village or destroy a village. And that is kind of true because those things are closer to raw materials, right? And in a way, even the web there's raw material there, things like code or just the infrastructure of the World Wide Web, like the cables that still go under the sea because the cloud is not a real cloud. It's still just cables running through the ocean. Hey, Dave, nice to see you. Come here. So yeah, tech is not neutral. So maybe these raw materials like code and like the infrastructure of the internet, this is raw material, this might be neutral. But these carefully crafted interfaces that we're interacting with on a daily basis that are presented to us, they're not neutral. They're far from neutral. They've been built by certain people with certain incentives, with certain motives in a different, specific environment. And even when they're built with the best of intentions, I mean, I'm sure when they made Facebook and when they made the like button, they were like, oh, this is going to be the best thing. People are going to make so many new friends. So even when we do this with the best of intentions, there's still bias and there's still consequences that we cannot foresee, right? So either way, tech, by the time it actually gets to us, it's no longer neutral. So that is... Yeah, so what I want to talk about today is a little bit of how do we actually get to a system that enables calm tech. So there's a lot of really cool projects, and I can share more with you. I'm sure you have plenty of them as well, of people that are thinking about what does calm technology look like? What do those interactions look like? How can we indeed use less text or more, natural sort of interfaces to communicate things? And that is very important to visualize the destination. What do we want? How should it work? But I think at the same time, we need to think about how do we actually get there, and how do we build a system that enables calm technology to be a reality? So bringing it from, an ideology into something we can actually adopt and implement in a financially viable way. So there's a lot of work to be done before we're there. But yeah, I wanna, oh no, my emojis don't work. That sucks. I love emojis. I'm a total millennial. Yeah, so it's this one. I will just, it's that one. So just imagine it. So yeah, basically, how do we get from A to C, right? Attention to calm, instead of A to B. And what can we do maybe in baby steps to kind of progress towards, also a financial model, like a business model that enables these things to exist. So I'm going to do this in 3 bits because all decent presentations are in 3 bits, right? So I'll talk about like a business point of view, designer point of view, and user point of view. I picked these, obviously the ecosystem is much more complex. I picked these 3, first of all, because they're key, but also because all of us in this room embody at least 1, probably 2, and maybe even 3 of these roles on a daily basis, right? So you're definitely a user of digital technology. You're probably a designer if you're here, and or somehow involved in the business aspect of it as well, right? So I hope this is sort of, resonating with your context. So I'll start with business, because it's the hard one. So yeah, I have an unpopular note, and that is that tech companies are not just or all or solely evil, right? we like to sort of scapegoat them and be like, yeah, they are the root of all evil in our society. Everything is messed up. People don't talk to each other anymore. People don't. Okay, this is clearly happening, but it's not just because they're sitting there tinkering how to mess up humanity. No, not really, not at all. It's just because they are economic actors in a capitalist system, in a digital environment that we have somehow crafted in a way where it's close to impossible for them to find a viable model without exploiting us as users. So I think if we want to genuinely move on to a solution, like a bigger system solution, we need to get this sort of perspective of they are just evil out of our way and see what other alternatives there are and think with them towards these alternatives to find a different way of doing it. So yeah, in short, also you touched on this again, but in short, the way the attention economy works, right, why these things work the way they do, is their company, their sole or at least primary profit is to maximize, or primary goal is to maximize profit. In order to do that, they need to maximize your engagement, right? Simple enough, it's direct correlation, so that's it. Their goal becomes to maximize your engagement. I'm gonna skip to this one. So the max engagement is the business goal. It is literally to keep you glued to the screen, tapping, scrolling, whatever, doing those interactions, focusing all of your attention, intention in your screen. Human goals, on the other hand, like the things that we truly care for, that we want, are things like spending more time with our family. I don't know, picking up a new sport, learning a language, doing a far travel, things like this, right? These are goals we have. And the problem here is that they are directly in opposition of each other. So in some cases, with advertising or whatever, they might not be perfectly aligned, right? One might be a little bit zoomed out or amplified. But in this case, because our attention and our time is literally such a scarce resource, and we can only really spend it once, they are in direct competition for one another. And I think nothing captures this better than this. Netflix saying sleep is my greatest enemy. It is a tweet, so it looks like a bit of a troll, but actually the CEO of Netflix has repeatedly expressed this sentiment in like press conferences and stuff, that besides YouTube and Facebook, their biggest competitor is sleep. And so, and this makes sense, right? Like, it's messed up, like it's totally absurd, but it makes sense. They're competing for your time and your attention. You spend 8 freaking hours every day, if you're good. I hope you're sleeping 8 hours every day, you know, sleeping. And so that's the time that Netflix is competing for. But of course, from a, you know, human point of view, this is messed up. Like, you need your sleep. This is sort of the fundament of having a, you know, a decent human life, is that at least you're taking care of your basic, like, you know, physical needs, like sleep, water, eating. So yeah, I think this captures it pretty well at how they're, you know, fighting for our attention and time. And that might very well be taking away from other things that are important to us. So yeah, to zero-sum game, either, you know, now often we lose as the user because they're sucking our time away from our human goals, and we feel like we lose and they win and they're growing, right? But if you actually flip it and we do not interact with that, or we do not, you know, provide them income, they lose. They will cease to exist because they're a company, they're not making money. Okay, they declare bankruptcy, bye, right? They will lose. And a new player will come in, etc. And that's just how the market works. So if we're not finding a different model, like to, you know, create a different relationship between the user and the business, like a different dynamic, they will just go on to lose and lose and lose. They don't have a financial sustainability, and only, you know, the shitty ones will survive, kind of. So we need to find a different dynamic in which maybe not we all win, hooray, hooray, but it is slightly more in balance. So yeah, that's in short the attention economy, and a more recent term, platform capitalism, which basically refers to, you know, when digital came out, we're all like, oh yeah, sharing economy, everything's free, ha da da. But now we're seeing that even though it was intended that way to decentralize information and access, actually what has emerged are extremely centralized, bodies of power. So it's the same dynamic we've been familiar with all along. Can I say that? So what are the alternatives? Are there alternatives? So for a second, I would like you to think, just in your head, if you know of any digital services products, anything you use, that has a business model that is not advertising based and you don't pay for on a monthly basis, right? So like a subscription direct to consumer model. That's a very good one. Thank you. I love that. Wikipedia. Yeah. Yay, crowdsourcing information.
You don't pay for WhatsApp.
Yeah.
Oh, you pay in information.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just like for Facebook, it's free, but actually it's not free at all.
Yeah. Yeah, you pay in a different currency. Yeah. That might even be more valuable. But yeah, I'll get to that later. Yeah, so if you can think of any, Wikipedia is a great one. If you can think of any more, please send them to me, because apparently this is extremely hard, right? Like I asked a lot of my friends, and a lot of them work in like digital or innovation or whatever, and most of them were just like, huh. And there was just nothing there. And I find this shocking, like that we don't seem to have a range of business models or revenue models or sort of different ways to go about creating and capturing value at all. Like our imagination is just like this. So I'd like to go through a few. Obviously, advertising-based is the major one. Also, direct-to-consumer one is not necessarily bad. So things like Spotify, Netflix, Headspace, you like the service, you pay a monthly fee. Nothing wrong with that. A lot of them are freemium, right? So you get a bit of the content for free. You pay if you want the full access. But I feel like there should be a wider range of options. And so I looked for a few examples that I'd like to just discuss with you, and hopefully they can provide you some inspiration. So yeah, these are all sort of people, ugly slide, that kind of did it or have found a different way of going about it. So I'll just go through a few. Patreon, I'm sure a lot of you know. So it's actually also a direct to creator consumer model. So basically a lot of vloggers or people that create online content have shifted to this. So instead of opting in for the ads on YouTube to be shown to their viewers, they ask their viewers to sort of send them donations. It's almost like an old school sort of basking street musician in the street model. But it's actually been really successful. Like there's thousands of people that are now able to full-time support whatever they're doing through direct support from their viewers. And this one is actually really cool. I'm sure you all know reCAPTCHA, right? It's the stuff you have to type when you leave a comment to prove you're not a robot. And nowadays, it's usually just like this tick box of I'm not a robot, but I'm sure you've all seen these, right? So they actually have a super interesting business model where these words, so say like the top right, the modern day tree-state, these are actually images from old books. It's like from old, text that they were not able to decipher with computer vision. So computers can read text if it's, neat handwriting. Is everyone okay over there? Okay, cool. Yeah? Where was I? Yeah, so, they took these old texts, actually, and they weren't able to translate them, so they used these texts through reCAPTCHA. So when you as a user are filling this in, they know, for example, the word modern day. They know this is modern day. They know, like, this piece of text is validated. But the other one, they have actually no idea what it's saying. So they're not using that piece of text to validate your not being a robot. They're using that piece of text to validate whatever is in those books. And so while you're validating yourself on the website, they can use that whole database to transcribe text into, to digitalize text. So it's kind of double-sided. So both websites were actually paying to have the reCAPTCHA, so spam bots couldn't like destroy their website. And on the other hand, institutions, things like libraries, universities, research organizations, were paying them to be like, yo, we have all this text, you know, all these books, and we don't really feel like, you know, transcribing them manually. Our computer vision thing cannot read it. Can you put it in reCAPTCHA? And so it was creating value both ways and capturing value both ways. So I think it's kind of genius.
It makes me hate reCAPTCHA just a little bit less.
Yeah, yeah. I was like, wow, I never even knew that.
Every time I see it.
Yeah. Well, now the thick box, I guess it's slightly easier, yeah? So yeah, and I suppose Wikipedia actually works in a sort of similar way where information is crowdsourced. Also, this one's Stack Overflow. I don't know if you guys know it. It's basically like a massive community online of developers. And a lot of, yeah, this is not like amateur developers, okay? Like I wouldn't be surprised if the lead developer of Facebook is on there. And they're sharing like huge amounts of just free code and helping each other debug stuff. And there's a lot of value being shared, all for free. And so basically their business model is not so much focused on the revenue itself, but how they create the value. So by building this community, they don't really have to do anything. Like they just have an online forum structure that's really easy to build and deploy. And then all the developers are just there creating like massive amounts of valuable data and information that was never before captured, because it's also not in books, because, you know, then there was no developing when we had books. And so it's like the #1 source of this knowledge. And when they sort of had this position, they obviously started building out with like relevant services. So now they have like job seeking features and things like that. And it ties in perfectly actually because all the developers are already on there. So say you are a tech company looking for talent, would you go to, I don't know, Indeed or Monsterboard, or would you go to Stack Overflow where all the good developers anyway are already, right? So again, like a really, I think a good example of creating value without sort of exploiting anyone in the process. This one a bit controversial, but interesting nonetheless. So 23andMe, I don't know if you guys know it, it's the DNA tests, like the ones that you can buy for $100. You can do them at home. You send it back to the lab, and they tell you everything about your ancestry and your sort of health makeup, genetic makeup. And you can buy these for $100, which is probably not that profitable. How do they make money? Mostly with the data. So now they have the DNA of loads of people that nobody really owns except for, you know, nations, some of them anyway, some governments collecting that data. But there's a huge amounts of data that they can use for research. So again, this is where the debatable bit comes in terms of privacy. I can already hear you thinking, yeah, well, what they're using my DNA for, like shit. But say they're using it for actual medical research, that's a great thing. And now the researchers don't have to go out and recruit thousands of participants and pay them to show up and send their results to the lab, et cetera, right? They just get the data like that. And so you, as a consumer, have access to this DNA test. You're funding kind of these, you know, medical research that otherwise they wouldn't have access to. Such a large database wouldn't be able to derive at the same insights and maybe produce like new medicine or, you know, new conclusions about how illnesses develop. Yeah, so this one is Friendsurance. The name, I think it's all already in the name, which I hate when companies have a name like that. But it's basically like a cooperative insurance. So instead of an insurance being this huge entity, you can basically build sort of like an insurance pool with your friends. So say we could all say like, okay, let's make like a ladies at UX insurance pool. And we all put money in there like you do with the normal insurance. But because you have a smaller pool, when we have money left after all the declarations, you actually get your money back from the big fund, which obviously doesn't happen in the greater insurances. And this is also sort of this model, like it's a kind of an old model as well that we used to do a lot back in the day, where you just have small groups of people providing each other and making, you know, agreements amongst them, each other to be safe without necessarily anyone making a profit. So there's that. Here is like a bunch of potential business models or revenue models, or yeah, don't stare at them now. Just take a picture or add me on LinkedIn. I'll send you to the, like all of these slides. But it's just to say, like, yes, it's really hard, but there is business models out there, or, you know, different tweaks you can do, like sort of business model alterations that can provide some sort of relief to this advertising-based exploitation model. So nobody really has the answers, but there's hints of things we can play with, you know? So that was it for the business part. I have a lot more, by the way, so if you're interested in this, like, please just come chat to me or whatever, just be in touch, and I'd love to learn more from your perspective as well. So then the designers, as designers, I think it's really important that we're very aware of what state we're sort of in when we're creating stuff, and how we're thinking of our humans / users / customers / you know, being. So a few random ideas about how we can sort of put ourselves in a different mindset when we go into creating digital products. So this one kind of ties into the KPI thing. So now what we're doing is mostly using vanity metrics, right? Like how many clicks, how much time, and just like maximizing all of those metrics. What could we do instead? So there's one research I did. Again, this is by Tristan Harris, the guy from Center of Humane Tech, the ex-Google guy that now was just like, no, that's him. So he partnered with this app called Moment, which is kind of tracking your screen time and everything. This was before Apple implemented that feature natively in their OS. And basically what they did was they asked users like how they felt after using a certain app or after spending time on a certain app, and how, you know, happy or unhappy they were with them being there. And I think the results kind of speak for themselves. But I think this is a really interesting way to think about it, and actually it's given rise to this new term that's called the regret test. And it's kind of asking yourself, if my user, you know, spends this much of time or this thing, would they regret like the time they spend? Would they regret this interaction, or would it actually help them? So how would they feel after the interaction? Would they feel happy and fulfilled, or would they actually feel a little bit dirty? It's a good question to ask. And then the other KPIs also that were mentioned before, things like customer loyalty, or just like general satisfaction, I think loosely linked to this, but I think this one is a very specific, quite interesting example. I'm going to skip this. I just want to, oh, okay, I'll go through these first. So there's supposed to be also a triangle there, but that's okay. So I'm sure you've seen this before. It's kind of like UX needs, right? It's kind of like a Maslow's pyramid, but not really. It's what does a user need out of an interface in order for it to serve them. And generally, we talk about functionality, reliability, usability. And then recently, we've added this thing called delight, right? Like, it should be nice. It should make them like, oh, I kind of like this app, you know? And I think that's cool. Like, that's already a step forward. The fact that we're even factoring in emotions into interfaces, that's great. Or, you know, emotional effect into interfaces. But in reality, it often turns into like, oh, let's just add like a mascot, and we just put a monkey there, and people are like, oh, I love this app because there's a monkey there. You know, it's, yeah. It's maybe not super helpful on the long term. So I'm thinking like, what if we could add sort of another layer on top of that pyramid, and think about something like how can we design for well-being, which is a more long-term sense of, you know, contentment, meaning, fulfillment, health, mental health, physical health. How can we design for that? So when you're going through a design process and thinking like, oh, is this functional, is this reliable, is it usable, does it bring delight? Maybe you could take a second and be like, is this somehow, you know, supporting or taking away from well-being on a long term? which is probably a whole discussion in itself. Again, but I think as designers, we're quite aware of of these more humanistic issues. And so just taking that second to ask yourself, I think could already take out some of the, small tweaks to make it more humane. So I'm certainly not the first one to come up with this idea. So there's a few cool people that are doing nice stuff around this that I just wanted to share with you. So this one is the Delft Institute of Positive Design. It's not focused on technology or digital specifically. They're basically asking like, okay, how can design actually help people live a better life? Whatever that means, right? But how can it actually be a positive source rather than just a functional one? And so they have a lot of different tools, but one that I quite like, I think is easy to implement, is this like card deck. And it's asking you like, okay, how could you design this thing for example, exploration? It's like, that's a feeling, right? And when you explore things, or when you're, done exploring things, it feels good, and not just good in a sense of like, oh, that was fun, but it's like it gives you some sort of fulfillment. So they have this whole deck of these sort of nuanced emotions, not just happy or sad, but things like exploration, equity, intellectual creativity, that I think are pretty cool as a source of inspiration to be like, how might our product, contribute or take away from this more subtle human experience? These guys are doing a similar thing, but much more academic. So if you like reading long-ass papers, this is the only paper I've ever made it through, to be honest. So yeah, these guys are doing a lot around positive computing. So this one is specifically for tech and digital. And they came up with this graph, basically, that is thinking about your user not just in terms of the interface itself. So not just in terms of jobs to be done, right? What we call in design jobs to be done within the interface, but also how does it affect them outside of the interface, task, behavior, life. So say, I don't know, I have like a to-do app. Okay, the goal of the to-do app is for me to put a to-do in there. Okay, I did that, now, great, user success. But in reality, in the bigger scope of things, is this to-do app really helping me to be more productive and more efficient with my time, or to be more organized in the things I need to do? I don't know, but it's a very different question to ask, right? If you just kind of zoom out and take a bigger scope of your user's context. So I think that's a cool one. This one is really fun. So when we design things, we intend a certain impact, right? And sometimes that works, and sometimes it doesn't. Like when they introduced the like button, they genuinely thought that this was going to be a super nice, fun thing for humanity. And it, had some sort of unintended consequences. So these guys made the tarot cards of tech. It's from Artifact Group. It's just a website. And they have all these prompts that before you launch a product can help you to kind of think through what possible consequences it might have that you didn't really, consider. So it's kind of scenario building. It's very playful. So 2 of them are like, what happens when 100 million people use your product? Right? Like the scale of things might really impact the consequences. Or if the environment was your client, how would your product change? So these are just 2 of them. There's like, I don't know, like 30 of them, I think. So I think this is a really playful way to kind of think through those scenarios. And if you pick out 1 or 2 things, that's huge, that's really huge. So then if you don't like the playful stuff, there's again a slightly more academic, serious one. So this one's the Ethical OS Toolkit. It's very cool. It has a bit more, just substantiation, I would say in general. So they've identified basically 8 risk zones in terms of technology and how that's currently developing, and then have applied all these like risk checklists. I think especially the one for machine ethics and data ones are really, really good, because there's not much stuff out there around how to sort of do applied ethical AI. So if that's something you're interested in, you should definitely check out these guys. And then, that brings me to my final blob. obviously we are all users of this system as well, right? And besides turning our phone grayscale and just taking care of ourselves, of our digital well-being, there's a few more things we can do. So basically when the internet came out in like 80s, 90s, you know, Tim Berners-Lee, like the founder of the internet, was like, yeah, this is going to be great. We're going to give all this information for free and everybody can contribute. And he had this beautiful utopian vision of a place where people would just share and contribute and learn. That worked to some extent. I mean, Wikipedia, yes. But then basically now it is no longer that, right? The internet is no longer a place you kind of visit and then kind of leave. No, it's digital ubiquity. It's like a fabric through society. There's no way you can take it out. And some people even claim it to be like a public utility. So this idea of free things doesn't exactly work in, you know, an economy where everything is digitalized. But, oh yeah, that's just the 5 biggest companies in the world happen to be all tech companies. But yeah, meanwhile, while this stuff was happening, because most of us have been around for a while, I don't think there's anyone like sort of under 20 here. But yeah, meanwhile, we've gotten used to getting stuff for free, right? Like, you're probably happy to pay €5 for a Starbucks latte, but if an app is €1, you're like, I don't know, that's a lot of money, you know? Like, why would I pay for an app if I can get it for free? Right? And this is huge, and this is, I do this too. I catch this in myself and everyone all the time. But when you think about it, we really do value digital assets very poorly, especially when you think about, you know, consciously for a second, how is this latte gonna affect your life versus how might it affect your life if you do actually get a premium subscription on this app that you're using every day? Like, how might that improve your quality of life? But somehow, you know, because we've gotten used to this open source internet, we just want things for free, and yeah, it's kind of a problem. So this is a really cool project. Again, has absolutely nothing to do with digital or technology, but these guys, so it's called True Price, I don't know, organization or whatever, but this project is called True Price, and what they're trying to do is figuring out the true price of things. So not what it costs in the store, but actually like how much does it cost, not just in economic value, but in terms of environmental impact, social impact, larger economic impact, like does it create local employment opportunities or all these kind of things. And I'm thinking like, what if we could do that for digital? Because like you were saying, it's free, but it's not really free. So like, what if in the App Store you would see this instead? Or what if you know, think like that. So Instagram, yes, it's free in the App Store, but honestly, you pay with 90 minutes of your time every day. That's a lot of time. Like, you could be doing a lot in that time. You could learn a new language, or you could just make more money. You know, so if you translate that kind of money you would make in 90 minutes to how much you're actually paying for Instagram every day, that's a lot of money, like you're sort of paying them indirectly, right? Yeah, they should be. We all work for Facebook. Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, maybe 30 of those, say, I mean, Instagram, it's not like all a waste of time. Maybe 30 of those minutes are voluntarily. And I'm like, let me just, you know, check up what's happening. And that's fine, right? Entertainment, information, it's there, that's cool. But then the other 60 minutes are kind of involuntary or unconscious, and we're kind of just like sucked in. So if you think even of these 60 minutes, even 30 minutes, it's huge what you're paying with. And then there's the much more subtle effects, like decreased life satisfaction, right? Like comparing yourself to social media. Again, the hard data is not there because it's impossible to research, but like we know this, like we experience this every day. Same for Facebook. Yes, it's free, but there is something you're paying with, right? Your worldview generally becomes a lot more polarized, depends on who you follow though. Doesn't have to be that way, but for a lot of people it is. And you're, you know, giving out all this sort of psychographic persona data that invites people to just target you, whether for ads or for, you know, more political purposes. So when we think about this, we don't just pay in money. No, we pay actually in a currency that is much more valuable, which is our time, our attention, our worldview, our mental health. Yeah, it's you're all so serious looking now. Really like shit. What? So yeah, I mean, we all know this phrase, right? If you're not paying, you're the product. And so that kind of leads to this very unpopular notion that we might need to pay. We might want to pay, actually, because by expecting things for free, meanwhile, we damn well know there's a huge company running this. Like, these things don't produce themselves. You know, these interfaces, they're designed, they're developed, they're deployed, they're carefully crafted. This doesn't just happen. So who's paying these people to do it? So we might actually want to pay to have technology that doesn't put us up for exploitation, but is actually in our best interest. There might be other ways, like all these crazy business models I've seen before. But even if that's not something we work out, consider paying for your favorite app, whatever it is, you know? So another emoji has died and has made up another shape. So this one I cannot actually illustrate. I can't do a cartwheel. So it's the cartwheel emoji that I'm not that fit, so I'm not gonna do that. So concluding, I wanna wrap this to an end, because I've been chatting for a while. No idea about my time anyway, but yeah, so there's very few answers. Like, I don't have any sort of 3-step guide or, you know, best practices or blueprints on how you can get your product or your company from here to being super helpful for everyone. Unfortunately not, but I do hope I provided some ideas, some inspiration, some just different ways of thinking about it, and maybe some things you can take back into your office or, you know, into your space and implement somehow. But mostly there's a lot of questions, right? There's a lot of big question marks still open. So I want to invite you to think about those. I'm not that smart, but it's a room of very smart people, I think. So I mean, if we collectively think about this and just make small steps, I think we can start, you know, sort of shifting that paradigm, even if it's in baby steps. So yeah, if you don't take anything else from this, I'd like to stress that design is the practice of shifting from a current situation to a more desired one. Doesn't have to be one future, can be different, you know, there can be different scenarios that are good. It's not just one thing we're trying to move towards. But I think our role as designers is not just to craft beautiful interfaces with perfectly rounded, you know, buttons. It's also to think about how to enable a system that will bring these ideologies into reality. And so if there's only one thing you take from today, I hope there's something you can do with that. Thank you. More dead emojis. This one emoji I can do. It's this one. Thank you. Okay, Marjorie, bring it.
All right. Yay. So yeah, thanks. Really interesting. So you talk about how as user we can have impact, as designer, and how can like company change, and which was in one of your slides, but you have touched upon in the role of governments. So my background as an industrial designer, like physical products are heavily regulated in the way they produce and some of the impacts. So how do you see the role of government? Because as user, we can impact, but nobody has changed the world by buying things, but more through like activism or like other ways. So what do you see the role of like regulations into that?
Yeah, well, to your point, I do think we can affect the world also by buying things, because actually in a capitalist system, purchasing is kind of like a vote. But that to the side, I do think there's a huge role for governments. The reason I didn't talk about it is because honestly, I don't know that much about regulation, law, policy, and so I wouldn't want to stand here in front like I know about that stuff. But there is some really interesting you know, things going on about that, like discussions. So a lot of people are saying there should just be a cap on how big companies can actually grow or how much power they can have. So not necessarily in terms of revenue, but say a Google is kind of, you know, like interwoven into the fabric of everything, and that shouldn't be allowed. So it should somehow be chopped up. There's other people that are saying it should be a public utility, which I think is a really interesting thing to think about. Because of course the implication of saying like, okay, we should pay for things is that people who are not able to pay will not have access, right? And that's a major issue. Like people in developing countries can now get on Facebook and get in touch and they have access to stuff. And if we make everything paid, they might not be able to have access to that. And that's not okay. So some people are saying things like, say, Facebook or, I don't know, Google Maps, they are public utility because to be a sort of functional citizen, you kind of need to use them. And so they should be kind of, yeah, taken up into a government body somehow. So yeah, those are two, you know, sort of solutions people are proposing. Personally, I don't know, because really I don't know about law stuff, and I'm not going to pretend like I do. Yeah, but I think the public utility ideas, when I first heard that, I was like, oh, I never thought about it in that way, but it kind of makes sense. Yeah. What do you think? Shall we keep that for the office?
Yeah, I think it's because, for example, I'm French, and I know that France has passed a law on the right to be disconnected, so your employer cannot, you can have consequences for not replying your emails out of business hours or stuff like that.
Yeah.
So, interesting.
Yeah, that's definitely a good place to start. Yeah, just in smaller contexts. Yeah.
The second time, right?
Yeah. So, I have a big question for you.
Okay.
Like, I really like to see this. I really enjoyed your presentation, by the way. I'd like to see the split between design, business, and users that you did. I think a smart way to make it a bit more comprehensible. The business section specifically. Don't you think, like, the same issues will always keep coming up when we keep working in a capitalist system?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. No,
okay.
yes. We should all revolt against capitalism, but I felt like that scope was a bit too big for my presentation.
Okay.
Yeah, but no, absolutely. Like, the same dynamics will keep showing up, and we can only challenge them in sort of a smaller scope.
Then let's do that now. 23andMe and reCAPTCHA. reCAPTCHA is owned by Google. And
yeah, they've been acquired. Like, but when they had this business model, they weren't owned by Google.
No, but that happens because what they're doing is in a capitalist system. And then now it's criticized because it's free work for training Google's driverless cars. 23andMe is acquired also by a medical, pharmaceutical, which is using it to do medicines, and we all don't know for sure if that's like for the good or the bad, because that whole business model is also, so it's kind of like it keeps coming back.
Yeah, I absolutely agree, and unfortunately I do not have a solution for the capitalist system. No, like I completely agree with your point. Yeah, and I'm...
so one thing you didn't mention, which maybe is interesting to mention, is B Corps, because that is something that started to happen a few years ago. So, like, to give
Tell us more.
a kind
Come
of positive
here.
side note. No, like there's some, like DuckDuckGo, some of you might know them. It's a B Corp, and Kickstarter is a B Corp, and you have like a lot of these companies that are like working in the capitalist system, but they get kind of benefits because they do something for the society indeed, but it's still in the, so it is in the realm of legislation and some, but I think it's worth mentioning because, like, at least I don't know of any examples where they did go wrong, because that is kind of like the whole purpose. Maybe there are, but I think it's a interesting direction.
Definitely. I wish you would have told me this yesterday. No, that's okay. Yeah, no, that's a great addition. Thank you.
No, mine, it's actually was going to make a very similar comment to that on capitalism and all those things. Because a part of the presentation made me think of like Bill Gates and the Apple guy, the one that's dead. Steve Jobs.
Dead Apple guy.
He's dead, whatever. Sorry, Steve Jobs. makes me think of,
He's turning in his grave.
Yeah. On those news that they raised their kids like technology free, that the kids didn't have iPhones or da-da-da. So 20 years ago, these people, they are building this type of society that we live now, they knew the consequence, so they were more aware than we. And then the capitalistic system that we cannot avoid. So for example, it makes me think of, I can't think of a more empathetic or interface or product, but I'm still part of a company that I don't really know of all intentions, right? I don't know that how this product is going to be used in 2 years from now. I don't know. I don't have control. We don't have control because we don't own anything. So what's your take on that, on kind of like designing and making those decisions?
Like influencing
to
from
make
the inside
yourself
out?
smarter, but not necessarily the product or the design, right? What's your take on that?
Yeah. Well, you mean like to change sort of from inside out, like how to influence that? Yeah. So, I mean, meanwhile, while we're not yet revolting against capitalism, I think we have to, one day maybe, we need to kind of play the game to change the game. So, some of these business models, they do allow profitability and, financial viability and also sort of doing the right thing, right? So I guess we'll have to fight. It still requires a sacrifice. Like they're probably not making as much money as they could, right? But they're still being very profitable. So I think we have to look for those. And I mean, other ways we can argue it is just like, using these arguments like your quality of user relationship improves. And so your customers become more loyal. And so they stay with you for longer. That's money right there. The talent, which is kind of, tech companies, one of their biggest challenges is sort of attracting and retaining talent, right? That's sort of their biggest asset, besides some algorithm things. But yeah, if employees are sort of leaving Microsoft, Facebook, etc., because they're actually starting to feel a lot of shame around telling their friends they work at these companies, which I've seen happening with people I know that are like, oh, where do you work? Oh, I work at Facebook. And like they feel shame, because it doesn't align with them. And so they might inevitably leave at some point, and that has been happening a lot this last year. And so that's another thing they can take into account, that's losing a lot of money. So I think while we cannot change the system, maybe we can just use of these sort of surface arguments to at least persuade them in return to, do more of the right thing and act slightly more responsible and ethical until sort of legislation kicks in and actually forces them to do so. But yeah, it's a very big question that unfortunately I don't yet have an answer to. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you. Where should I throw this? Oh my God.
That?
No?
Yeah. Cool. Yeah. I'll also be around, so.
Okay.
Hi there. First of all, thanks for your presentation. And I think there is something you can do. I went actually to an open source conference, and there were like 6,000 people, like developers, and they were all making alternatives for chat, for maps and things like that. And they were all lacking of designers. So they were all like, please help us, designers.
What is this called?
There are like open source alternatives for like example OpenStreetMap, and for Chatter an alternative, there's Matrix. And all those projects have a lot of developers but don't have designers. So they're all like, please help us designers. Yeah. And there's something you can do to get to a more, because the beliefs are exactly identical to this.
Yeah. That's great. Thank you, and you so much for your additions. I'll take them in for if I'm ever doing this again. But yeah, that's really good to know.
I will add a link because there's a whole platform for that, for designers too.
Yeah, that would be really cool to check out. I might.
Developers are more human-centered than designers. From preaching all the time.
Yes, so human-centered.
There are actually people doing something about it. They're actually.
Yeah, the irony, huh?
The irony.
Cool. Thank you. Oh, what is this?